Robots Radio presents...
Today's chat is brought to you by, well, all of your support. Through the patronage you provide the Focus Fire chat team through Podbean's crowdfunding, we are able to provide you with the weekly podcast as well as the website and other aspects of Focus Fire chat. If you have any interest in becoming a patron of the FFC, please be sure to visit our website and click on the support link. Even a single dollar helps, and for those of you who are already patrons, thank you again for your generosity.
You may have heard the whispers of guardians gathering in the shadows, exploring the mysteries of this world and the worlds which surround us. We are all in search of truth. Sometimes we need to focus that search. Focus that fire. And so we come together. Welcome to Focused Fire Chat.
Welcome to Focus Fire Chat, recorded on December 2nd, 2020. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining us once again. This week's episodes are going to be focused around exploring the Covenant from the Halo series. This particular episode will serve as what we have come to call the intro session of the week's exploration. Before we go any further, however, let's run through a quick introduction of who we have with us on the show. As always, this is your host, Blue Crew 86. And we also have, as usual, whenever we talk about Halo lore, our very good friend, guest co-host, pensHALO. Pens, how are you doing tonight?
Doing well. Glad to be back again.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah, it feels like it was just, last week that we talked about.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. Just a bit.
Well, I mean, so we've talked about the relationship between Master Chief and Cortana. We've talked about the Halo arrays. I know in the past we've talked about Halsey, and we've kind of danced around, especially with the Halo arrays. We kind of danced around the topic of the Covenant a little bit, or we kind of like started to get our toes in the water a bit.
Yeah.
So as And they're really, honestly, especially in the earlier games, like especially in all the way really up until Halo 3, I think, they were really the major antagonist, or one of the major antagonists in the Halo series, the Covenant.
Yeah, they've pretty much all been present throughout the entirety of every Halo game in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, in the in what would be considered the Bungie era Halo games, yeah, it was the Covenant was the primary antagonist that we fought.
So I guess the first most obvious basic question is who are they? What are they? Are they? I mean, I think most people who are probably listening to this know that they are multiple species, right? It's an actual covenant. But what is the Covenant? Like when we talk about the Covenant, what is that?
Okay, so probably it's a religious hegemony of different alien species that controlled a large portion of the Orion arm of the Milky Way. They were formed in 852 BCE, which is before Common Era, and it was as you said, a group of alien species that were bound together by one religion. That religion was based upon worship and reverence of the Forerunners, who's been mentioned a number of times in almost every show that we've done. And the core of their religion was based around this idea of the Great Journey, which ended up being a total lie in the end. We'll get into that here in a bit for that part. So when you say, in addition for like the who and the what part is, there, like I said, there were a number of different species that made up the Covenant. And just to give a quick summary of the main ones that we see in game. The first ones are the Shan-Shayum. They're also known as prophets. Their homeworld was Janjur-Quam, Janjur-Quam was the planet that they were from, but High Charity, which was a mobile planet city that the Covenant used as their capital. From their appearance, they were bipedal. When they stood, they were about 7 feet tall. They had very long serpentine necks and limbs, but they had a very frail skeletal structure. This came from being so long on High Charity and having a lower gravity and actually a smaller gene pool to pull from. Um, oh, you. I'll go into that a little bit more here in a minute. They also had large amphibian-like eyes, and because of their frail structure, they actually required anti-gravity devices to move around easily. You see this a lot in the Halo 2 and 3, where we see the High Prophets in these large, massive anti-gravity chairs. Excuse me while I have very bad flashbacks of the fight against the Prophet of
Oh,
Mercy.
legendary.
Yes.
Legendary runs are always so much fun.
So, prior to the firing of the Halo Ray, the Shanshayum had hoarded a large number of foreign artifacts on their homeworld. So when they were reseeded back on their homeworld, they kind of had an advantage and from a technological standpoint because they had all this Forerunner technology that was already available to them. As part of this was a Forerunner dreadnought known as the Anodyne Spirit. This was a key ship. Forerunner key ships were designed that they could activate a slipspace portal to the Ark, which is where the Halo rings were actually built. It ended up that this particular key ship was the one that actually brought the Prophets back to their homeworld, but it got hijacked by a fragment of the AI Mendicant Bias, which was the AI that was corrupted by the Flood and was defeated by Offensive Bias. It had not been destroyed. It had just been split into pieces and essentially forced to realize what it had done wrong. It was trying to get back to humanity to make amends, but the ship actually crashed on Jandra Quam. So it ended up that there was a group of priests that Mendicant Bias and the key ship were both considered key Forerunner artifacts, and was the central thing, the central icon in the Covenant religion. As part of it, there were a series of priests that would speak for the Oracle, because in actuality, Mendicant Bias was inactive, but they kind of used, these priests were supposedly the conduit for the Oracle to make decisions and to pass those decisions on. So whoever was in charge of the priests essentially could rule the prophets. And the lead prophet was called the Philologist for that. Now, initially, upon the discovery of the key ship, this was in 2200 BCE. They discovered the dreadnought. It's embedded on a piece of land on one of their on the shelf of a sea. They begin to worship it. Now, as with any religion like this, there ends up being a split. There were two groups split along lines of how to approach the technology. There were the Stoics. They refused to enter they just wanted to worship. They didn't want to enter any of the Forerunner technologies. They didn't want to get into the key ship, and in doing so, they saw it as heretical. You then had the Reformists. This was a group that wanted to, and there was several thousand of these. They wanted to enter and study the key ship. They wanted to see what technology they could get from it, what kind of enlightenment they could get from it. These two essentially had a bit of a Cold War for a period of time that slowly became hot to the point where at one point in time, the Reformists stormed and entered the dreadnought. They spent the next 40 days researching and looking to decode the Forerunner symbols and whatnot, and they figured out how to actually take off, to activate the ship and take off. So when they did this, they actually took a huge chunk of the planet with them. So they took off to go ahead and essentially find other Forerunner artifacts and things of that nature. And what they took with them, the key ship and the part of the planet, would actually form the foundation of the great city of High Charity. During their travels, this is when they encountered the Hergok, and they enlisted them to working with Forerunner relics, because the Hergok actually understood the Forerunner symbols. And it was the key ship that gave the pensHALO status of leaders of the Covenant, because it was considered the central icon of the religion. The next race are the Pen'HALO. These are the elites. Their homeworld was Pen'HALOS. They were also bipedal. They were very muscular. They were about 7 to 8 feet tall. They had quadruple hinged jaws, and for their hands, they had 2 fingers in the middle and opposing thumbs on either side. Like the pensHALO homeworld, they had Forerunner relics. However, as a slight difference, the Pen'HALO all revered those relics. They revered the Forerunners, and they considered tampering heresy. But there wasn't the split that the pensHALO had. There were some scientists that studied the Forerunner technology in secret, but it didn't turn into the Civil War, and that ended up breaking the prophet race apart. Because of this, they had developed their own slip space travel, and they actually established dozens of colonies. The Pen'HALO is very much a warrior culture, very samurai-like, very driven by honor, and they see all other species as lesser than them. They really didn't have a unified government. It was very feudal, and there were a number of clans where that was all based around a central house known as a keep, and the Pen'HALO in charge of the keep was known as a Kaidon. They had a very patriarchal society, very male-dominated, but there was one title that actually had status across all clans, and that was Arbiter. This was actually granted to the warrior ruler of all clans, and it was, for the large portion of the Pen'HALO history, it was a very great privilege and honor to be named Arbiter.
Which is a big difference from what we see in games for Halo 2 with the Arbiter there.
Yeah, that there was a change that occurred after the Pen'HALO joined the Covenant. So,
okay, yeah, and so I mean, like, and I think like the other thing too is, the Pen'HALOs were viewed by the pensHALO or the prophets as a lesser, which is kind of an interesting way of, because they themselves viewed other species as lesser. But I think what did you say, that it was their honor and warrior, decentralized warrior culture that allowed the prophets or the pensHALO to kind of manipulate, feels like the best word for this situation. I don't know if that's too heavy, but like,
no, it's more along the lines of, and what ended up happening is when the two finally met, and they did get into combat, the Pen'HALO were definitely warriors. The elites were definitely warriors. The prophets were not, but the prophets had the edge in technology, and that gave them the edge to essentially force the Pen'HALO to surrender. However, the Pen'HALO could appreciate talented warriors and intelligent warriors, which, the prophets, for all their lack of physical stature, they did have technology on their side, and they were intelligent. The prophets saw in the elites a very strong military. So even though the elites surrendered, they ended up coming to peace, which, and through something known as the Writ of Union, actually formed the Covenant at that time. So the elites would become essentially like the military leaders of the Covenant. But yeah, the prophets did see the elites as lesser than them, but they, especially at that time, they still had a lot of respect for them because they were so strong militarily. Okay,
that's fair. And let's take a quick break before we talk about actually the downfall of that particular honorable position. So we'll be right back.
Myth is a podcast about the very soul of humanity. Join me each week as I explore stories from our history, from our mythologies, about what it means to be human. I'm your host, Tom, and Myth is available on every podcatcher, anywhere. And if you're familiar with any of my other work, then you might realize that Myth is like a lore cast, but for humans. Join me each week on Myth.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the
Actually,
elite.
let me
Okay, yeah, go for it.
let me get through the rest of the covenant, and we will definitely get into that part though. 'Cause
Right. Oh, yeah,
there's a
yeah, yeah.
whole
No,
story
but I
for
mean,
that
like,
part, so, yeah.
I was thinking, like, the elites up until really Halo 2 were the military. They were kind of the gurus of the military, and then in Halo 2 we got with the game side we got introduced to these new characters who replaced the elites as of Halo 2. Were so and I'm talking about the brutes. Were the brutes part of the Covenant prior to our introduction to them in Halo 2?
Actually, yes, they were. They came into the Covenant. I think they were one of the last of the group to be brought in.
Okay.
I believe, but they were definitely in place well before the start of the Human Covenant War.
Okay. So what are the brutes, I guess?
Yeah. So the brutes, their formal name is Yorulhane, but brutes. Their homeworld is a planet Doisak. Their appearance is they're bipedal, and they're this strange cross between a gorilla, rhinoceros, and a bear.
Which sounds ridiculous, but actually makes perfect sense if you've seen one.
And it explains why they kind of change a little bit from game to game. There is a very heavy gorilla, feel to the brutes. They're about 8 feet tall. They're very large and very stocky. They're exceedingly strong and exceedingly physical in combat. As anyone who played any of the games would know, when you damage a brute enough, they go into a berserker rage and they totally forget about using their weapons and they just attack you. And for those that attended Halo Outpost, there was a size comparison chart of all of the Covenant races, and the only thing bigger than a brute was a hunter.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of intimidating to look up and see this, and it's like 8 foot tall. It's like, wow. From a societal standpoint, the brutes all dealt in packs, and it was essentially everything was survival of the fittest for the pack. So if you showed any weakness at all, you could be, even though even it was your family, you would be usurped. Probably the biggest example of this in the Halo universe, it happened in the book Halo Contact Harvest. Originally, the clan leader for the brutes that are in that book was Macabus. He got injured, and his nephew Tartarus killed him because he was no longer fully able to. He was not 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And in the society, the pack leaders were all known as chieftains. You could tell who the chieftain was because they had the gravity hammer. Which
was very symbolic as well as on their style, because subtlety was not their strong suit.
Big hammer, hit things, smash things. So think of the Hulk in an Ultimate Rage. Mm-hmm. That pretty much sums it up.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and then talking about the hunters, you mentioned them. These are one of my favorite ones.
Yeah. The hunt. Although the game in the game we know them as hunters, but actually it's the name is Lekgolo. Their homeworld is the planet Tay, and actually they're all very small worm-like creatures. They're maybe a foot and a half in length for the most part, but they can join together to form larger colonies with a single personality. These are, also known as gestalts, an organized whole that is perceived as more as the sum of its parts. There are a couple of forms for this that we've come across inside of the Halo games. The first is the Megalakolo. These are the hunters. These are a colony of Lekgolo that have come together to form that 12-foot tall armored behemoth that has a shield on his left arm, a plasma cannon on his right arm, and they usually work in pairs, which makes them really, really fun to fight, unless you're in Halo CE and you're able to get behind them with the Halo CE Magnum, which is a one-shot. Doesn't matter how far away, a one-shot with a Halo CE Magnum will take out a hunter. I really want to know who at Bungie coded that wrong.
All I remember is when you showed me the Halo 5 variant of the wall run with the Magnum.
Yep.
The rail gun in pistol form.
But yeah, so and then the other thing is in Halo, when the scarabs that we come across in Halo 2 and in 3 and in ODST, guess what? They're all made up of Lekgolo colonies. Essentially, a scarab is a quadrupedal mining platform, which fitted with a massive focus cannon, and what allows it to move are Lekgolo worms. Then, for those of you that played Halo 4, the Harvester, especially that in Spartan Ops, that Harvester, which is nothing more than a huge excavate, it's the largest excavation platform that the Covenant had. Yeah, that was made up by Lekgolo worms as well. It was known as Sba Lekgolo. Again, just a massive colony that's essentially was put together to drive these massive excavators. Both the Scarab and the Harvester, their primary focus was for mining and drilling for Forerunner artifacts, but they had been kind of changed over for weapons once they came in contact with humanity. There is one other type of Lekgolo. We do not come across this in game. The only place that we have come across this can be seen in the live-action Halo Nightfall. It was Thanolekgolo. It was a meta-colony of Lekgolo. They were only found on Installation 04, and they were actually created by the Forerunners in an attempt to, combat the Flood. That plan never worked out. It was a massive colony. They were very sensitive to technology, and they would not only that, but they would attack and destroy biological life. So it was an attempt to use Lekgolo to destroy the Flood, because apparently the Lekgolo were not able to be infected by the Flood.
That would make sense in a really weird way, because they're individually not... They wouldn't be of interest to the Flood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Lord knows I
thought about that. That would be absolutely terrifying if they were.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That actually would give me a nightmare to realize that I had a Flood infected hunter. No. Not unless you give me back the Halo ZE Magnum. No. So, the next one is, I don't know of any Halo fan that doesn't seem to have a small soft spot for these guys. Young boy, the grunts. Their homeworld, again, these are the grunts. These are the ones that have all the quips and the high pitched voices that seem to be running away, calling us saying demon in the games. And they also have some of the best Easter egg lines at all. Their homeworld is the planet pensHALO. This is a methane planet, because that's what they primarily breathe is methane, which is why in game you see them with masks and these large tanks on the back. It allows them to actually function. They're bipedal. They actually have an exoskeleton, but they are a vertebrate species. They're not invertebrates. They're only about 4 to 5 feet tall. They're really stocky, and they have, as I said, they have really high-pitched voices. They also are very much a pack, but out of all of the Covenant, they're the most gregarious and sociable.
They really are.
Yeah. And again, anyone who's played the games and listened to the audio, it's like, yeah. I mean, they have some of the funniest lines. And as a side note, the the one guy who voiced a lot of the grunts in Halos 1, 2, 3, and ODST was Joe Staten.
Which still, I love that. I love
Yeah.
that little factoid.
Yeah. Now, the other thing about the grunts was they were actually seen as unintelligent because they weren't educated by the Covenant, but they really weren't. They actually had intelligence. They were actually fearsome fighters as well. Um, but they were kind of seen as cannon fodder for the Covenant, mainly because, like, individually, they really weren't. They couldn't, like, individually, like, even normal unarmored, unaugmented soldiers could defeat a grunt, but they came in waves and like huge packs that would just come and attack you and wipe you out.
They made up in quantity what they
Yeah.
lacked in strength. They also are some of the quickest to just go into a suicide run.
Yes, the suicide grunts.
The suicide grunts are just, it's even more terrifying when they're the mech grunts that then decide to go suicide. And it's like, no, you're too big to do this.
Well, just it's all. But I mean, you're not wrong. But I mean, those grunts and those mechs actually do have some great lines.
Oh gosh,
The shooty cars.
Shooty cars, still one of my favorites.
Okay, we only have a few more races left to go over. The Kigyar, Jackals, and also the Skirmishers that we see in Halo Reach. They're both technically Kigyar. They're just in slightly different position. They all fall under Kigyar. They're just like sub-races or subcategories. I don't know what the technical term would be for this. The Jackal's homeworld is Aeon, and the Skirmisher's homeworld is Tavao. Now, the Jackals are they're both 6 feet tall. They're both kind of slender, although the Skirmishers are a little bit more muscular. The Jackals actually appear more dinosaur-like, while the Skirmishers are more avian in features. The Skirmishers also have beaked heads with teeth, and both have clawed hands and feet. They're very clannish in nature. And their society is actually matriarchal. So when all the key, like if all of the named jackals that are in Halo lore, a lot of them are women, or female, I should say. They act as shipmasters, they act as heads of their society, and they're also pretty much pirates. So they're the ones that are that will prey on anybody to make a buck off of anything.
Which you get a really good sense of in Hunt the Truth.
Yeah, you do, and you also see it in Smoke and Shadow, which was one of the other novels that. I can't. I hate the fact that I can't remember who wrote that right now, but it followed the Rion Forge, who was the daughter of John Forge from Halo Wars. It was it's very well written, and it's worth the time to read. Next we have the Yanmei. These are the drones, otherwise known as buggers. We come across them in Halo 2 and 3, and also in ODST. Their homeworld is Palamak. They're 5 feet tall, very insect-like. Their wings are very beetle-like. They are capable of flight, and they do have vestigial limbs on their abdomen. Much like insects, they have a hive mind, and they have a queen that is at the center of that hive. They really didn't interact. They're pretty much keep to themselves, and they don't interact much with other species of the Covenant unless they absolutely have to. And the last is, well, your favorite, the Huragok. Fun note, they're technically not a separate species. They are they're a created species. They were actually artificially created by the Forerunners.
They're amazing.
Yes. They're known as engineers. Overall, they have 6 appendages. They have a bulbous section in the back with air sacs. They have a very long neck, a small snout, 6 eyes, and they float. Normally, they are blue in nature, but there is a version that worked with life workers, which was the science and medical part of the Forerunners, that they were green. So those are the races, the primary races that we come across that make up the Covenant. Each one of these had some different roles. The pensHALO, they were leaders, both of their society and of their religion. There was a high council, and the leaders were known as hierarchs, with what they called high prophets, which were prophets that were actually in charge. These were the highest religious leaders of the high council, and they held near absolute power. In the Halo games, we're talking about the high prophets of truth, regret, and mercy. The pensHALO, these were the shipmasters and warrior generals. They also served as the honor guard of the prophets up until 2552. The Eurohane, the brutes, these were they served as shock troops. Also, in 2552, they took over for the honor guard.
And that was the Halo 2 upset that I had mentioned earlier.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
Yep, the Great Schism. The Lekolo were heavy ground troops. The Ungoi were shock troops, cannon fodder. Kigyar were scouts and the damn snipers. Anyone who remembers running Metropolis on Halo 2 on Legendary knows exactly why I'm so frustrated with that. The Yanmei, actually, they were originally engineers. They were brought in to help repair things. And also later in the war, they were pressed as airborne infantry. And then you have the Huragok. Again, they were actually supplanted the Yanmei as engineers, and they also worked at gathering and excavating Forerunner artifacts.
And also, real quick, too, I think you mentioned it, but the Lekgolo were really good at excavating, too, because weren't they the ones that would burrow, but they wouldn't eat technology?
Yeah, they were, in regarding, yes. Well, yeah, they definitely could eat technology.
Right, they
could, yeah, but they also were the engines of the two Covenant major excavators in the Scarab and the Harvesters.
Okay. Because I remember, I think it was it Broken Circle that you had the High Charity. I think it's the floating city that they had, the Logoko. The ones where we learned about the transfer to the new prophets.
That was in
was that a short story?
Contact Harvest.
Contact Harvest. Okay. Yeah.
Because I think the Covenant, the prophets sent Lekgolo worms to disable the engines of the key ship.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Okay, cool. Let's take one more break real quick, and then I know you have on the note that you want to talk about the way that the Covenant actually keeps time, because surprise, surprise, in a vast alien culture, there is they have a way of tracking time.
My name is Brian Burton. It's been 26 years since the bombs fell. And since I've left the vault, I've been trying to rebuild. This isn't the Appalachia that I remember. There's so much more to everything going on. And I promise to find the answer. So if you're out there, if you're listening, just hone in on these coordinates. Remember, there's a place for you at the end. Omega.
The Omega broadcast, A Fallout Story, is available on iTunes, Spotify, and many great podcasting sources.
Okay, so timekeeping for the Covenant. How? I don't really know the segue into it. How does it work?
There's no easy way to do it. Now, they kind of, obviously they still have, they classify everything, periods of times, as ages. And these are all marked by major events. They actually all fall into 7 categories. And other than the first one that we'll talk about, each one of these ages has happened multiple times.
Oh, okay. So it's like it's like the Mayan calendar, like the rotation. Okay.
Kind of, yeah. I won't go into how they handle their days and whatnot because that just gets really confusing. So the categories of the categories are the age of abandonment. Now, there's only one of these. That was essentially the time the time before when the Forerunners activated the Halo array. Essentially, that's known as the age of abandonment. Then you have ages of conflict. Now, these are major conflicts. These are the civil war between the Stoics and the reformers for the prophets. These are the Ungoi rebellion. These are like the war between the prophets and the elites. Those are considered ages of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
You then have ages of discovery and reconciliation. These are times marked by large leaps in technology or after peace has been declared between the Covenant and a new race, the time frame where the Covenant adjusts its structure to accommodate the new species. These are known as ages of reconciliation. You have ages of conversion. This is the time frame where the species that make up the Covenant were defeated. The end of the war between the elites and prophets is one. Ages of doubt. Like any major society, there are times of internal dissent and conflict. That's another age that's set aside that's identified inside of the Covenant structure. And the last one is ages of reclamation. These are periods of time where major Forerunner artifacts are discovered. For example, the Halo rings. That is ushered in. That's actually the 9th age of reclamation. So there are 8 other times in Covenant history that they came across some kind of major Forerunner structure. The Shield World in Halo Wars, that was the discovery of that would have been in an age of reclamation. The idea that they've discovered new Forerunner technology and are researching it and integrating it in. So that's kind of how they break their timeline up. Like I seem to remember, like the Age of Conflict. I believe there was at least 39 of those.
Oh, jeez.
Just again because these are major conflicts.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, but still, yeah, it's like
I may be trying to remember that one specifically, but I believe like the 39th Age of Conflict was the Grunt Rebellion. So.
Oh, it's so sad.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, I think it is the age of shoutouts. This really is, as we kind of have started doing with the new kind of format for the show, we try to use these first intro sessions as exactly that, a good intro. And I think that really is a really well done intro. I really like, so huge shout out actually to you, Pens, for putting together the summary. I know we were joking about that before.
Quote unquote
summary. Yes. I fully sympathize with that. But like, I really think that's a really good intro to it. And it shows like the breadth of this antagonistic force, really. But do you have any shout outs for the intro session for us?
Again, for you guys for having me on. Again, I do appreciate it. Also, a really big shout out for the guys over at Halopedia. Halopedia is it's all fan driven. I can tell you that one of the lead guys there is CIA 391, as that's his handle on Twitter, and it's halopedia.org. They've done an amazing job at cataloging all the information that has been out there for the Halo universe. 32 novels, the comics, the animated stuff, the live action stuff, all of the live action commercials, all the other little pieces of lore that come inside games. They've all categorized that and put that together, and they've done it in a really great way. I can tell you right now that putting this stuff together would be immensely more difficult if it wasn't for that. So big shout out to the guys over at Halopedia. They they help make me seem more knowledgeable than I really am.
Yeah, that wiki is that every time I visit that site, it blows me away how well and how well put together it is. Like, they have so much information included, and it's not, I'm not going to say it's not overwhelming, because it is, but it's overwhelming not because of the structure, but because of just the sheer amount of information. I think they have they have over 13,000 pages now or something.
No diss on Baxter or any of the guys for Ishtar, but
is this their third platform that they've had to move to because they keep outgrowing it?
I think so. I mean, they're not to go too deep into the history, but there actually used to be the Halo Wiki, and then you had Halopedia, and the two of them merged.
That's right. That was in the past couple of years that occurred. But yeah, I mean, it's the same in any community. I mean, for Destiny, you have the guys over at Ishtar and Destinypedia. And then in Halo, you have Halopedia, and it's just like you have these dedicated group of people, of fans, who go above and beyond to categorize and catalog everything to make everyone else's life a ton easier in trying to find information. Whether you're trying to find information about what happened in 2552, or you want to find out more about AI or the Covenant Forerunners, you can type it in. It'll bring up the articles, and if the information is out there in some way, shape, or form, they probably have it there. So yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, until next session, which for us will be in a couple minutes, but for you guys it'll be a couple days. I just always, as always, want to thank you for your time, and until next time, remember, with wisdom we conquer. Stand strong, stand tall, and keep exploring. With that, we'll begin to wrap the chat up. Thank you again to those over on Twitch for coming to spend your evening with us. If you'd like to join us for the live streaming of the episodes, please be sure to give us a follow over on twitch.tv/FocusedFireChat. Links to all our episode archives can be found at www.thelorenetwork.com. Please be sure to email us at focusedfirechat@gmail.com with any comments and or questions for the team concerning the podcast, and let us know how we're doing by giving us some feedback and a rating over on iTunes as well. So until next time, focus your fire and may your light shine bright.
You've been listening to a Robots Radio podcast. Smart shows for interesting people. Check out all the shows at robotsradio.net.